So good afternoon, everyone. Our theme today is still hope. And at this period of the day, we say something as best we can on what illumination or insights Ignatius of Loyola might have in regard to hope. So I've been doing my homework on that. And this is what I came up with. Well, it's quite surprising. Ignatius speaks a lot about hope in regard to sin. So if you're not into sin, you may not feel the power of hope as Ignatius experienced it. Sorry about that. Okay? Those who know the spiritual exercises will know that he invites the person who's giving the exercises to help the retreatant to notice their sinfulness. Sin can be very subtle, and we've talked about it in the evening reflection here from 8:30 to 9. There are sins that are very obvious and gross, if you like, and there's a kind of missing the point that can go on, a failure of imagination, a lack of appreciation on just how big the enterprise between God and ourselves is, or is meant to be. So those who have a fundamental knowledge of Ignatius know that he was quite a lad. He was a waster, he was a brawler, he was a womanizer, he was self-centered. That's how he was. He wasn't in a great space for God getting at him, except that God organized a cannonball to smash his leg, pull him up short, end his hopes, his human hopes, and see what happens next, kind of thing. It took him 3 days to go to confession in Montserrat. I don't know if any of you can measure up to that. Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, but the idea of spending 3 days, it reminds me, since it's a dull evening, I just thought it made me laugh. We had a priest in Galway. We have a house and a chapel in Galway, and he was on Friday evenings. But he loved Match of the Day. This was in the good old days, okay, long before your time. And Match of the Day would be on at 9 o'clock or on that kind of thing. So he was sitting alone in the church in the confessional when, and saying to himself, nobody's going to come in now. And the next thing he heard the door of the church opening and this shuffling going on, and it landed inside his box. And he said to himself, well, this will be a short one. Surely will be a short one. At least I'll get the second half of the match. These are the deep thoughts that go on. So he pulled across the shutter and he said, yes, my child, or whatever else they said in those days. And there was nothing doing on the far side. So he then tried another gambit and said, if you'd like to tell me your sins, or if you'd like to tell me how long since your last confession. And suddenly your man got to light and he said, well, Father, 'tis 40 years. And our man realized that was the end of Match of the Day and resigned himself to whatever might be with the best of grace. And so he said to him, well, where would you like to begin? Dead silence. So the priest said to himself and said to him, how about we go through the 10 commandments? First, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not have strange gods before me, what we had in the readings today. and there was dead silence. And the priest was running out of ideas. And then a voice came from the back, or from the confessional. "Okay, Father, you attack and I'll defend." He wanted the priest to accuse him of all kinds of things. He could say yes or no to that, Anyway, that's my funny story. So 3 days at confession and so on. But what the point was for Ignatius, that he saw the mercy of God in a way that very few people seem to see it. He's just overcome, overwhelmed, demolished, beaten, and he surrenders himself to the mercy of God. And in the exercise, he has a lovely passage about kneeling before the crucifix, or inviting the retreatant to do that, and say, how is it that you, who are all-powerful and the Creator God, could come to this, to be crucified for my sake, for my sins? And he invites the retreatant to spend time pondering over that, and then coming up to try and answer the questions: what have I done? What am I doing? What ought I do for Christ? A totally transformed person at this stage. And then he had to decide, well, what I have done, I've talked about. What am I doing? I need to get going. What ought I do? He could have done all kinds of things. He could have set up a pilgrim movement for people to march from Spain to the Holy Land, that kind of thing. He could have devoted his life to composing prayers suitable for sinners, etc. And what he did was he gradually began to reflect more and more upon the mercy of God in his own life, and how God is active in his life, and that God is active in everybody's life, and therefore there's hope for everyone. But it's a different kind of a hope than one he started out with until the age of 26. And Ignatius lived in a pretty dreadful time. Rome, he admitted, was Christian only in name. This is in the early 16th century, or 15th century, no, 16th, early 16th century, in the early 1500s. And the world, he used to speak privately about the sad misery of this life, that people could be so harsh with one another, so much missing the point, etc. And rather than that driving him to despair and going off to be a hermit, it spurred him on to realize that it's in decision-making that choices are made. In decision-making, sin or grace prevails. And therefore, if I can somehow or another construct something that will help people to become aware of how it is for themselves, their own sinfulness, but the fact that they are also the beloved of God, and that they're called to great things. And so he composed his spiritual exercises. But decision-making is what matters, because decisions shape me, and they therefore shape the world. And you can just look at what's going on in the world at the moment, say in Ukraine and Russia and so forth. So that's a big thing about hope for him. Sin is the occasion of hope, because God is so good. And we can look at the mess of the world, and it can depress us, make us despair, or it can give us hope. But it's a hope that goes beyond all ordinary hope. It's a hope that the mercy and goodness of God will prevail over all things, and all I'm asked to do is to play my part. He didn't intend to start up the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. He just thought, if I can help one person one person. That'll be okay. Maybe later I'll help a second person and go on things in that way rather than high level of organization, do you know? Because he would watch the Jesus of the New Testament and see how he dealt with people one-on-one. The Samaritan woman at the well, Nicodemus at night, all the rest of it. And then in regard to decision-making, what he wanted was that people would make their decisions born of the love of God. He used to speak about a thing called De Arriba. The love that moves me to my decision, whatever it might be, should come De Arriba. Arriba is above, come down from above. It was his way of saying, you let God make the decision in a way and you follow through on it. And he had this awareness that one person can make a difference. And he believed that the one-to-one adventure of making the spiritual exercises or making an Ignatian retreat, whatever you want to call it, was the best of all things that the Jesuits could do, or that he believed at that stage. So, we might take to ourselves the notion that I can deepen in my appreciation of the mercy and the goodness of God and how encouraging God is to me, just as Ignatius found how encouraging. God wasn't slapping him down. God was encouraging him to take a step forward. And Ignatian spirituality and spiritual direction involves being with the person and noticing where are their good desires and helping them to take one step forward. As you might get almost as, and it's built on the same thing, Alcoholics Anonymous is built on Ignatian spirituality. For today, this is what I'll do. For today, I can avoid drink, whatever else it might be. And then the last thing that I would mention would be he encouraged his followers to engage in a ministry of dealing with other people. They called it a ministry of consolation. That in whatever way they were dealing with people, they didn't come down heavy on them as was the custom of the times. They, in some way or another, managed to bring consolation or invite them to accept the consolation or the gentle drawing of God, rather than making them, I'm a miserable sinner and that's all that's to be said about me. Do you know? Instead, I am a wayward beloved. A wayward beloved. And God is inviting me to use my gifts and graces to help the world. The idea of always trying to put a positive interpretation on what anyone said, that's a ministry of consolation. How often have you not been listened to, or somebody downs a good thought or that kind of thing? In this, you put a good interpretation on the statement of another. And so, there we go. His conversion then is focused on an awareness of the compassion, goodness, and energy of God for the world. And that he, because he's a forgiven sinner, becomes a compassionate person. And so the ministry is a ministry of hope in a messy world. And that's what attracts so many people to Ignatian spirituality. And it's very intimate in the sense that it deals with the decisions that I make. And I'm invited to make them with God, whether as a group in a parish pastoral council or running a school or director of a bank or whatever else. So there's where you see so many people who, they retire from very good work and then they've nothing to do, and they sit and they play golf and they polish their car and they watch television and they get very ratty about the state of the world, and they worry about their health and they worry about their money, etc. He would be saying, hand yourself over. Notice what you could do with the gifts that you have and bring hope to the world. So, thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Brian. So now we have an opportunity for about 10 minutes to take personal space, just to quietly reflect on what you have heard Brian share with us. Just noticing what affected you, what struck you, what touched you, what you feel it might be saying to you. So just take quiet time now. I'll watch the clock.